Hello everybody. Are we live? Sorry about that. I had a BSOD right before the stream. So I had to restart everything, get things rolling again. Hopefully the restart will keep us safe and ready so we don't have too many issues. So we are live today. We're going to be doing a ZENcast, CCM design, sizing, and maintenance. And the demo is zone configurations. If we get into a zone, great. We have a few slides that'll really help you along the way. So I'm hoping that that'll keep us busy there. So a little bit of housekeeping tips. Log into the YouTube chat so you can join in the conversation. If you at the name, you could direct message the person that you're attempting to talk to or answer. And then also there might be polls. There's an exclamation point command you'll see throughout the presentation. You can hit that in chat and you should get the link for those. YouTube settings, you want to turn off autoplay, and you might want to set the quality to auto 720p 60 if you can. It'll keep that from going in and out. Okay, and that's down with the gear down at the bottom. And then of course subscribe to notifications so you can see when we're going live. Be sure to subscribe. All right. So we're going to do a few things. We start off typically with a few notices. For instance, a conference and gathering news. We have the opportunity to have some guests with us today from the TTP Virtual Conference 2020 in USA and across the globe. It's last week and this week, and this was one of their sessions. So I invited them in. Come on in and see what ZENcast is all about and what information you can get on the ZENworks products. Micro Focus ZENcast YouTube channel is semi-monthly, the first and third Tuesday of each month at 9 o'clock Mountain Time, and you can subscribe to it at the Micro Focus Support and Training channel, and details are there on the YouTube. If you do YouTube and then Micro Focus Support and Training, it'll take you right there. And then recent webinars that have happened. A couple months ago, we had What's New in ZCM 2020 Update 1 and Protecting Data with ZENworks. So those recordings are in a nice index out there on the site. I have the URLs here in case you're watching this recording. Looks like after my BSOD, I didn't get my chat back up, so I'm working on getting that back up as well. So thank you for your patience there. A couple of new news. We've done some of these product news before. You know that ZCM 2020 Update 1 is out. It has a ZDC. There's an agent cleanup. There's a TID there. ZCM Appliance security patches. There's a security patch that does an OS upgrade on your appliance so that it actually does a SLES upgrade as part of your security patches. And then the PRU for July is out. Imaging driver update is also there. And it's also for 2017 Update 1, 2, 3, 4 and ZCM 2020 Update and Update 1. And the neat news is, oh, not there yet. ZCM 2017 Appliance OS Upgrade SLES 12 SP1 to SLES 12 SP3. And you go through the online update tile on your appliance if you're running an appliance. See, cool solutions article for ZENworks 2017 Appliance has a new heart. That's basically on this upgrade and how to do it step by step. 2017, reminder, 2017 committed support ends October 31st this year. Now, if you're still on 2017, after that, we want to, give us a call. We'll do the best we can to get you where you need to go. We don't want to leave you straggling behind, but we did want to just send that reminder out there for you. The ZENworks Service Desk is currently at 8.1.2 in January. 8.2 beta is starting within 2 weeks. You can email zen@microfocus.com and tell them you want to be a part of that beta, and they'll respond back and get you all the NDA stuff and help get you the details on when they meet and so forth. Look forward to seeing you there. A lot of good things happen in the beta so that you can see what's coming up in the product. And this is a big change in this particular release. So it's good to get a heads up prior to. And then ZENworks Reporting Server 7.2 is out there. And don't forget the Appliance patches. And then we do have some DB migration tools for Sybase, MS SQL, or Oracle to Postgres. And finally, the Micro Focus desktop containers version 12.7 is released. So check your customer portal for that if you're using the desktop containers. It has some fixes for, especially for the MS Update Windows 10 20H1. Some Micro Focus resources that we cover here on the stream is COVID. If you're looking for some Micro Focus tools to secure and connect your users during this pandemic, it's like there's Filer out there that's free licensing through, I think, August or September, and other details on the COVID-19 that will help you working from your users working from home. Newly designed Micro Focus support pages, ideas portal, life cycle, and then the product resources. Be sure to check out those pages. Know that they're there so that you can have some reference when you're looking up certain details. And then education resources. We have the on-demand training, but know that the new ZENworks patch management training is available. And we've enrolled into the Acclaim badges, which is the current way of certifying people. So we also are tied into that organization so that you can actually get your badges for taking our ZENworks training. Micro Focus Education Center, Knowledge Base, Product Forum. You guys are one of the best resources we have out there as far as being able to resolve issues. Somebody's already done it once. You posted on the forum. Hopefully they've seen that and you can collaborate to get that fixed in your environment. Doesn't mean it's the exact same fix because Micro Focus ZENworks is so flexible, but at least you have resources there. So don't forget about your colleagues. Support and Training YouTube channel, this one here, and ZENworks webinar recording. The YouTube channel also has a ZENworks service desk and desktop channels, separate channel support. So be aware that those are there. Webinar recordings, the index is there, and ZENworks documentation. So I think we're still live. No BSOD so far. Let's not talk to the demo gods. New training available. We talked a little bit about the 2017 appliance upgrade to 2020. That training video is out there out at YouTube and the on-demand site for free. ZSD user self-provisioning with ZCM bundles is out there as well. And then another shout out to Oliver Vormwald, who did 2 languages for the most recent WinPE imaging, which was just a month and a half, 2 months ago. Did a great job, and not only did it in 1 language, but also in Germany. I got some chat going. Thank you. Hello, glad to have you with us. Brent P, thanks for subscribing. Other news, Filer 4.2.1 released. The Engage Security Newsletter and the Security Impact Newsletter. Nice information about products across the board that Micro Focus has, including ZENworks, and different webinars, different training that's available. We submit our thing into their magazine so that they can get you some information through that medium as well. Okay. Coming in from Sweden, it's a late night for you, or gonna be there soon. You're probably eating. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate that. The last ZENcast demo, we did a little bit of DMZ discussion, and we had Vikram Goyal, the ZCM product manager. He did an MDM, and we thought we'd get through more of it, but we didn't, right? So we did some setup and configure with MDM and ZCC. We did some Apple subscription, enrollment policies, iOS bundles, BYOD enrollment. We then had to end the stream, right? So part 2 is coming August 18th. And that's where we'll wrap up the config and do the Android stuff. So he's volunteered to come on back. So be aware that that's coming up in the upcoming weeks. He'll be back to finish up that particular series on the desktop mobile device management. All right, so finally, a topics update. Today is going to be ZENworks Zone Design, Sizing, and Maintenance. August, we're going to have Asset Management. We're bringing in a guest, Bob Reynolds, the ZENworks Systems Engineer in the U.S. here. And then ZENworks MDM Part 2 from Vikram. And then September, we got a list of things going on. ZENworks System Auto Builds, Inventory Management, which kind of tapers off of Asset Management in a way, but on the ZENworks side. And bundles and virtual applications. So we're trying to get to everything that you guys are asking. These are some of the things that you requested for in the different areas: database maintenance, server performance. We're going to cover some of that today. Mobile management we covered last week. Patching, encryption. So we're trying to get to those. And if you've just joined us, remember you can log into YouTube chat to join in the conversation. And we're happy to respond to your chats if you have any questions. And welcome the TTP. Those that are at the TTP conference, this is a session for 45 minutes. And if you don't have anything longer, then after that, it's a full 2 hours or less, depending on how our chat goes. Again, our commands, ! Feel free to use them. Okay, we're going to get into today's conversation. I'm going to bring in Arvind Tiwari. He's my counterpart on the backline ZENworks support, and I want to welcome him to come on in and have a conversation with us as we go through these slides so that we can get you some information about design and sizing and maintenance. Arvind, are you there?
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you. Yes, I can. Thank you so much. Glad to have you. Thanks for your time. A little bit about yourself, Arvind. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so I've been working since 2006 with ZENworks, been in development earlier for about nine and a half years, and then been working in support here, and been part of the ZENworks backline team with Paul and many other colleagues that you guys work with.
Very good. Yeah, it's good to have you on the team. You're an important part of our team, and everybody's. We really appreciate your expertise. We're going to go through. He's joined us today to talk to us about some design, sizing, and maintenance. Some of the tools we're going to discuss. Some of the tools available for monitoring, zone monitoring, and health checks, system upgrades and updates. Tips for successful issue analysis, maintenance, and training resources. So, zone creation and evolution. I put this slide in here at the last minute. Me and Arvind were talking. We realized that when you first install ZENworks, it could have been way back, it could have been yesterday. But as you do every update, it starts to evolve, right? And so we're here to discuss how to make that evolution still as efficient as when you first installed it. Okay, and that could come down to maybe LDAP connections. Are you doing it flat? Are you doing it deep, right? What are your user source connections? How long does it take to scan your directory to get to that user to log in, right? Those are all timing issues and things that can be improved depending on how your particular zone has evolved. Traffic and firewall, access to external servers, satellite or parent configuration servers. How do you have your configurations, your collection, configuration, inventory? How are those connected and talking to your managed devices? Are they efficient, or do we need to put a satellite out there and roll up your inventory because you have a slower link? Server role grouping, bandwidth, traffic. What is your load? What is your connection like? And restricted content for ZCC admins. Have new features come into ZENworks that you now need to make new roles for your ZCC admins so that they have more rights and not just the super admin rights. You can just restrict them just to the different rights that they need to make their job efficient. So some of those things are load balancing, more than one server, having multiple primaries. And an appliance is an easy way to get a primary up. Maintenance plan. Are you tuning that database? Are you purging that database? What are some of the things? Do you have internal, external? How often are you applying the online update patching? We're trying to do it the cadence quarterly now. So I try to remind people on the ZENcast when the last one was and when the next one is, so that you can keep up with your patching. Feature updates and configurations redesigned for maximum efficiency and adjusting hardware. So maybe you've removed a primary server and brought in a new one, or you need to do that. What's the hardware adjustments you need? Again, look at the system requirements. Look at the documentation out there that you have. There is a new ZDC coming if you've upgraded to 2020 Update 1. A new ZDC is coming out there, 7024741. It's in the way. So be aware that that's there, and you should be able to see that out there soon. I think the TID went live today. In the the TID did, yes. Thank you, Arvin. Arvin wrote the TID. It's out there today, live. So be aware. And that was 741. Apologize for that TTP in the way there. Health check and maintenance checklist. So I'm gonna let's see. I don't have chat. How can I get this in chat? I see chat on, but I don't have my chat. I was going to put that URL in there. That's the URL for my filer. I'll be sure to I'll work on getting that here at the end of the stream. For some reason my chat didn't come up and go live. Yeah. Okay, but I have a HC and maintenance XLS spreadsheet, and I'm leery of opening it right now because that's when I got my blue screen of death just a little bit ago. So it has things like we'll cover some of them in the slides. Let's go forward. ZENworks 2020 resources. Again, we cover some of these typically in the ZENcast as well. But the documentation, system requirements. This is what we're going to be using today. Cookbook, best practices guides. We've reaped from these or gleaned from these particular resources in order to put these slides together. And so we're going to talk a little bit about design and sizing. Now I'm going to blow your mind here for a little bit, because did you know that we have all these roles right now in 2020 Update 1? And then credentials, we have even more than that, and certificates, right? Now, some of the I went back. So some of, like the asterisk ones are the ones where there's just one role on a primary server. And then the percent sign is the satellites have those roles also. So you're talking all these roles talking to each other. You're talking dedicated servers. There's a system update server. You can dedicate these services to a particular server if you have more than one, so that you can start doing that load balancing, right? That spreadsheet that I have tells you exactly where in ZCC to find those, to configure those. But you have assignment optimization. You have parents of satellites. You have your MDM primary servers, active sync servers, zone sharing. You can dedicate servers to these particular functions. And then you got all these schedules. User device login, refresh, telemetry. You're saying, where do I start, right? There's so much here. Where do I start? ZENworks has just gotten to be this huge resource. And how do I tap into those resources? Subscription schedules and services. Right? You have patch download subscriptions. You have other types of subscriptions like SUSE and ZENworks Zone if you're doing zone sharing, subscription and share replication, MDM services. And where do you start? Where you can make it scalable. You want the nice thing about ZENworks is it's scalable, it's flexible, it's intuitive, robust, and redundant. Okay, all of these things in this wheel, all these spokes in this wheel are part of ZENworks. And we have coming in, we have, oh, thanks for putting that in there. I see it got in the chat. Thanks for putting that file in there. So do you remember what ZENworks stands for? Zero effort networking for the users, not necessarily for us admins, right? But at least we can make their jobs a little bit easier. So we start at the beginning. We want efficiency. What you need to know is your environment. Nobody knows your environment better than you. Your infrastructure, your land speed, your corporate policies, your security policies, HR, finance, network resources, and so forth. Your clientele, you know your users better than anybody else, right? Your customers, your technician staff, their skill sets. So once you know that going into ZENworks, you should be able, and then you know what your environments are, your physical, virtual, OS, your hardware requirements, connecting services, you know what your speeds are. You want to leverage all those skills. And you also want to, if you can, have a test environment similar to what you have in production. It won't be identical, but it'll be close enough to where you can see what's going on in, should you put that in production, right? And then, of course, document the environment. As these things evolve, it's a fire and forget on some of them, right? You've configured certain things, and now you've evolved that 2 more generations. Well, what did you set, and why did you set that? So being able to document your environment is very, very critical. So how do you start? You understand the ZENworks environment. We're going to cover some of this today. What is a zone? What are primary server functions, satellite server functions, managed device functions? How do I leverage those functions to accomplish the device and user management I need in my environment for those types of devices and users? So some of the things we're going to cover, as we mentioned, 2020 Update 1 Readme, system requirements, deployment best practices, and primary server and satellite reference. Great key. That's the titles of them. If you go to the 2020 documentation, great key resources right there. So you may have seen this picture before. Architecture. You got just things everywhere. You know your architecture, so you can limit this to how you want to. It's flexible. This is a 2017 because Sybase is in here. I need to replace that with Postgres. But I thought it was a good way of showing you the different activities that happen on your network that ZENworks provides or puts on your network. So you need to load balance, you need high availability, you need redundancy, and then you need obviously some good response times. Okay, so some of these architecture things are important, and that's like the road it's running on. And then what are zone components? Understanding the components. ZENworks zone physical systems, services, protocols. What are the ZENworks servers? Active and waiting threads. We'll cover some of these in configuring or adjusting memory and CPU utilization and those things. Things like if you have a VM, you want to make your memory dedicated. Okay, so you don't get any overwrites or some conflicts. OS level monitoring and environment. Things like routing, your ACLs, your ports. Do you have active sync? Do you have VPP? You need to make those connections through that architecture screen, as we noticed earlier. What are the zone components? So you're collecting statistics all the time, and they're improving on this. Even Update 1 has a great improvement for the ZENworks bundle status. They've improved that tremendously, and with the CVE coming in and the patching, and now with antivirus coming in, we're going to need to know more immediate and real-time statuses of those. So they've improved that tremendously to help leverage that real-time reporting. Licensing and subscriptions and registration status, system update status, certificate authorities, know your expiration dates of your certificates, your CA, your server certificate, ZCC folder hierarchy. How are you doing your folder hierarchy? I was talking with one of the TTP members this week and looked at his hierarchy, and it was completely different than mine, but made complete sense for his environment. Again, you know your environment better than anybody else. In our case, my previous employer, we had an Active Directory, and we had the users, and then departments under that. So I made my devices the same way. In ZCC, I had departments and then departments underneath with my devices. Then I also had, for bundles and policies, I had departments because they may have their own policy or their own bundles. So what works for you? Hopefully you can get some ideas through this and, again, evolve your system to be a little more flexible and adjust to or enhance in efficiency. Example for ZENworks 2020 appliance changes. So based on SLES 12 SP4, so for instance, if you were to bring up a 2020 appliance right now, this is brand new to you, what are some things that have changed from the previous appliance of 2017? So you may be adding an appliance server in your zone. It's based on SLES 12 SP4, default system memory, 16 gigabytes recommended. Why? Because the Vertica database, it's another database we're adding to the zone to allow for quicker and faster reporting and response. So with that, you need a robust appliance, and the appliance with 16 gigabytes will give you that. Disk space is a little bit larger, 80 gigabytes. New components and services for, like I said, Vertica, Kafka, and Zookeeper. Vertica is the database. And newly supported hypervisors on SLES 15, Hyper-V, and Citrix Zen Server. And then where do you start? You look at what you know best. How many devices do you have? So that determines what database. So now you have a primary, you have a database that you can use for the population you have, and you move forward from there. Tools available. So I'm gonna ask Arvind to come on in and kind of tell us a little bit about why monitoring is important, and then I'll click through the slides for you, Arvind.
Yeah. So typically when you're in an environment like we are monitoring, you may not be always monitoring your zone to know how efficient it is working, or you may have done some changes, or you may have added some servers. And over the time, we keep adding new features, and sometimes you may enable those features and you might see a performance difference, or it could be some configuration change that you did in your environment that caused it. So constant monitoring or a periodic monitoring always helps to set a baseline where you can judge and compare how is your zone overall performing with the tasks that you were undertaking in your environment. So that way you can judge, and as long as the zone is performing ideal, you may also avoid some of the performance issues. So you have to keep having a constant monitoring procedure to have a standard way of checking your zone health. So that way you have to keep monitoring your servers in the zone, and that's something that we have a mechanism to do that. It's not something that you can also plug in your own scripts and modules and other sort of external tools, but that's one reason that proactively monitoring your environment can mitigate some of the potential disaster issues that can otherwise cause disruption or downtime on your production.
Sure. And so we have some of those in the appliance, at least, right?
Yeah, so we had something called Ganglia, and that's something that you need to set up, and there's a doc that guides you through the procedure that you need to enable certain services, and then it comes with a dashboard where you can monitor certain stuff. with Ganglia. But you can also use external tools. I think there are some tools like Nagios and few others that you can plug in and then monitor your network components, your servers, and create dashboards related to that to see if they're like a disk alerts or they're kind of hardware alerts or software, any kind of vulnerability alerts. You can set up those things.
Sure. And let's not forget the appliance ZENworks configuration itself to see you can modify some of the, sorry, this is on auto. Under basic and advanced, you also have some other settings you can modify depending on what you're evolving to, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Diagnostics. So tell us a little bit about this. Isn't there a probe or something in here that goes out there and checks out your primary servers?
Yeah. So diagnostic is built considering that it's more useful if you have a multiple server environment where you have different primary servers running, and then you have a set of services running on each of the servers. And it's kind of difficult to go to each server and track the status of those services because you may have dedicated roles assigned to different servers. For example, you may have a patch role running on a different server, which is handled by a certain service. So it's always good that you have to monitor all the service from one central console. And that is achieved easily if you go to diagnostic page and check the status of all services. It's more of a real-time data. It doesn't give a cumulative history of your information of how the service has been performing, but that way you can know if there is any problem or any of the services, or let's say for any reason one of the server went offline because of some crash or it ran out of disk and services doesn't load. So those kind of events you can track or identify if you're going to diagnostic page. Or let's say in case you're running into high CPU on one of the patch servers and things are not working, or you may not know even what kind of memory is configured on the one of the servers. So in most of the ideal environment, you have a homogeneous configuration, but it may happen that certain servers is kind of low on certain hardware resources. One may be physical or virtual or mixed environment kind of uh, mixed environment infrastructure. So in all those cases, it's always good to monitor and see if one of the servers is being hit hard than the other server, or one of the server is making too many database connections. All those kind of data that you can easily identify if you kind of jump into diagnostic snapshot view.
And drill down to dump the threads like it shows here, or see the thread pools.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay.
Correct. So, and you do have certain things like you have like how many HTTPS connections versus HTTP connections. Those kind of stats also you can know. I mean, ideally in a real time, if everything is configured as per the best practices, which for most of the environments is just default, can meet the requirement. You don't have to fine tune and
Right.
change it, but sometimes you do depending on how you're using ZENworks, right?
Yeah. Again, evolving your system to make it suit for your environment, but then again, document that, right? So you know that change has been made. And then we have the NetIQ App Manager. This particular tool I haven't used. I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't used either.
Okay, but it is a networking monitoring tool. Gives file count in a given directory. Connectors exist for services that are running and so forth. So it's real flexible in itself to see again your database connections and your memory and your CPU. So if you have that, tap it into ZENworks and leverage that NetIQ App Manager as well. You can also use Nagios. I set this up. We had this in previous employer as well, where you can see what services are running, what connectors exist, and tying those into different parts of ZENworks to see file count or LDAP availability. Then you could also report on that, or at least give alerts on that, so that we know when a particular server is down or service is down. So next we're going to go into zone monitoring and health checks. And this is in ZCC. This is ZCC part of it. We have message and hot list view. So you have message summary, which shows bundles, devices, policies. This right in the middle. Everybody's seen this on the summary screen. And non-compliant devices due to bundles or policy failures. Error or warning messages count for devices. We've seen where these counts are almost consistent. This happens, this can happen in a multitude of ways. You could have a bad policy or a bad bundle out there, but you also can have policies that's sent to a device that didn't have system requirements on it, so that device isn't going to respond right because it's running on it and it really didn't need to run on it, right? You had a policy or a bundle that is being deployed to a particular version and forgot to put system requirements on it. So this also helps for tuning those applications and policies. We have LDAP connectivity, LDAP user source connection status, right? And then ZENworks configuration. Now, being able to read to those contexts, you obviously need a read-only user in that directory that can read the full directory, not just a portion of it. So that way, if you grow your OUs or your users in new containers, you can it'll actually pick those up as well. So be aware of those particular. Once you set something and you're growing your external systems, you may need to tie that into the ZENworks configuration as well. And then certificate status, making sure you know when your certificates expire. It will nag you 90 days prior, and then weekly after that, it'll nag you, and then take certificate backups, back up the CA. Do you have any other comments on this particular page, Arvin?
No, actually, for the mobile side also there has been changes where
Right.
if you are moving to 2020 because of the iOS device restrictions from Apple, you need to make sure that your certificates are reminted for server, especially for MDM server, for 2 years, and then renewed after every 2 years based on that. So once you go to upgrade, you can do that always if you're using MDM server. So you don't have to do for all the servers, only for the MDM ones.
Good.
But yeah,
call on
certificate remit has been so one of those areas where we see a lot of questions because it's something that you're not used to doing it every day, so it's more of something that needs to be done only when we have some sort of expiration or certificate change, or let's say you change the DNS of your servers. All those cases you might end up renewing your certificates, or if you're moving, let's say, from internal to an external or third-party certificate. So for all those cases, you have to go through the entire workflow and make sure you complete activation process in a right way so that you don't underestimate the underdefine the activation date, because sometimes you need to make sure that you're giving enough or adequate time for your devices to get the new certificates before you end up with activation.
Yeah, I remember my first when I was previous employer, I let it expire, and that was not a fun day. So, yeah, you have to keep accountable on the expiration date. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's pretty much with the certificate, and then we are trying to keep improving the doc as we go, because we often get some sort of concerns on certain nodes, or let's say you're using wildcard, then you have to go in a certain way. You have to manually create the CSR versus going with the ZENworks to create a CSR option. So those kind of small notes and reminders are kind of highlighted in the documentation. So just be aware of all those. And now with we are also having SSL enabled for satellites. If you're kind of moving to 2020 update 1, the communication between the primary server and the satellites. So basically anything going out of the primary server for content distribution is over SSL. So they involve certificates, and we do SSL verification.
Sure.
And right from 2020 version, even the collection role on the satellites, you can have SSL enabled. So if you're using collection role, prior to that, they were non-SSL. right from 2020, they're all SSL. But you have to configure it. There's an option to do that.
And the chaining of in the cert itself. So if you have chaining, we've had some instances where we've experienced the chain. So then other things in ZCC are agent server connectivity. Use the dashboards. They'll once you start configuring them and getting used to them, it really comes in handy, and it's a quick snapshot. Now with the more real time on the bundles, you can really get some details for your bundle dashboard. And that's messages, inventory, and patch, and then ZENworks auditing. Utilize that ZENworks auditing. You can keep track of a lot of different things in there if you're concerned about logins being slow or who's logging in where or those types of things. You can set this up so that you can see some of those areas that you're investigating. So not only is it just for the ZENworks tools, but use it as a tool. You could use ZENworks as a tool to be able to manage your people and your devices as well, and their responses.
Yeah, one example here could be useful is, for example, let's say you deployed a bundle to all the devices in your environment, and you see the bundle only installed or failed on a subset of devices and not entire devices. So what about the rest of the devices? It could be possible that those devices are not checking in, or they're kind of offline, or there's no physical machine behind those. So this kind of agent server connectivity dashboard would help to understand what are the actively communicating devices at a given point in time. So you only track your status for those and then just discard or have a cleanup mechanism for the remaining ones. So that way your stats are not going to be skewed, and you may not see an under deployment than what was targeted. So those kind of stats will help to track through this dashboard.
Yeah, the activity on the network itself. That's perfect. Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. Now for content. So be sure to check your content replication. You typically, whenever you import or you update, you get an update from NCC or you import it manually, be sure to make sure replication status is across the board 100% before you start deploying that, because you can run into some issues should it not be deployed 100%. In this case, obviously there's two devices that still need the replication status. And we need to fix that communication if it stays at 0 or never gets to 100%. So utilize those monitoring systems or the replication status as a tool as well to make sure that you have that communication to those other devices working properly. And that goes for patches, bundles, policies, system updates, and so forth. You can modify this and tell it to include or exclude different devices. All right. And this is where you need to know your ZENworks system, and you've documented, hopefully, that it's unavailable on a couple over there, but it's included. You can see in the lower right-hand corner. Or is it excluded? Because we need, maybe it should be excluded. Because of a slow WAN link, or they don't get those particular bundles. You can do it by bundle, you can do it by folder, you can do it on the system itself as a global entry as well. So know where you've made these settings, because once you start going from the system into folder settings and individual device or object settings in ZCC and modifying like replication and updates and so forth, you may lose track of where you set that. And so documenting that global is the best. It's a good start, but know that you can leverage the other areas in order to streamline what you need to do for your environment. Any other comments on content?
Yeah, so one more areas that I have often seen is with respect to the patch content. So we do have a lot of minor changes, or you do have to make certain configurations to make sure your patch contents are kind of coming down to your patch server without any firewall restrictions, because this content comes sometimes from our feed, or sometimes it can directly come from the vendor websites. So if you have any sort of firewall or rules that can block the content, that way your patch may show up, but the content may not be there inside the
Right.
packaging level. So you may end up with failures when you're kind of trying to deploy the bundles, or they may not even replicate seamlessly. So those kind of intermittent problems can happen uh, for certain patches, depending on how your rules are configured. Or even, let's say, you have the patch on your server and then you want to get it replicated over to some satellites, but over the network routers you may have some rules which can block the content download between the satellite and the agent, or agent versus primary. So I've often seen problems where the deployment failures happen because of the content is blocked, or the ports are not opened, or the replication doesn't complete because of uh, the agent download. The agent is configured to pull the content from satellites, but the satellite
Right.
has never replicated the
Got that
content. Right? So
replication data. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah, so it's always good to understand the workflow for what bundles. Like if you're too soon in deployment process, they might also lead to failure. Like you created a bundle and then you assign it to all your devices without waiting for it to replicate, and the replication has its own schedules that you need to be aware of. That
yeah,
how you have configured it.
all those schedules I had in that one slide, there's just a bunch of them. And it's not to overwhelm us; it's to leverage to make it work even better for us. And this particular last slide right in the front is our ZRS server. So you're able to actually hook up ZRS to ZCM and do some reporting on your content. So that's also available. If you own ZCM, you also have ZRS, ZENworks Reporting Server, as a resource for you. And it's an appliance. Do some more monitoring and health checks for satellites and agent databases. So there's things you can run on the device itself to see if the agent's running properly and connecting properly. The ZENworks ping, the are you running? And then for authentication, there's a TID 7012747 that helps you better understand using the CASA tester tool when you're authenticating into when the agent is authenticating, should there be some issues with that. Collection files, processing, there's a bunch of processing going on, and they have their own schedules inherited to ZENworks, which can be adjusted in the ZCC. Some of them can. But you have inventory, status, messages, patches, status contents not replicated, as Arvind mentioned. You can force the content replication and verify that. And then making sure maybe the satellite, we've had some instances where the satellites run out of disk space. Again, some of these systems evolve, and we've put out a satellite with so much disk space that it's fine for the first 5 years. Come year 6, we've now upgraded 2 more generations, and we have more bundles we're replicating or policies, so we have more content going to that satellite, making sure we understand that satellite is healthy.
Yeah, and in that perspective, I've even seen that patch management is one of the biggest contributors. Like when you are kind of downloading like bigger Microsoft cumulative updates, and which mostly go for over a gig size, you may end up exhausting your disk space if you are replicating those content over to satellites pretty sooner. So you have to account for all those things, and when you're configuring or planning for disk space, and may have to have a cleanup mechanism to get rid of those bundles or patches that you're not using them.
So, yeah, plan for revisiting those devices later on. Patch has a configuration, so you can say, this particular vendor is all I want to download. But if you haven't checked that, it may be default. It may be downloading more than what you need, and so you're getting all this content and bandwidth taken up for those things that are coming down into your system that your system thinks you need, but you may not necessarily need. So that's a great mention on the patch. I do want to say, I think the TTP session ended a little bit ago. I don't know if you have something going on in the next session. Thank you for visiting, or hang out and we'll get through some more of these slides within the next hour. So thank you again. Arvind, tell us a little bit about the database system health.
Yeah, so since 2020, since we have migrated to Postgres, we have come up, first of all, I'm covering the one which is most people use, which is the embedded OEM database that we ship with the product, which is Postgres version 11.4 by default. But you can always have your own version, 11.x versions, which is supported for an external database, because many times you may not be qualified for the minimum scalability requirements if your zone has, let's say, more than 5,000 devices. So before you come with the maintenance, you have to understand why the planning has to be done to move to the right database, because you may be running on MS SQL, but you're having probably about 5 to 10,000 devices, which you can easily get away with by switching to Postgres, and we have tool to do that already. So you don't have to spend on licensing for SQL. So that way you can migrate your database, as well as in the documentation, we do have a best practices on how you can maintain your Postgres, like doing basic checks, like taking database, doing and checking the integrity, and like a vacuum process, and running some basic monitoring scripts in case you experience any performance issues like CPU or things like that. So these kind of things that most people have been doing on a previous database, which was Sybase. Now the same thing has to be done on this database too, especially the backup, which we recommend that needs to be done after every upgrade at least, or and then subsequently on a daily or weekly basis, because that way you can, if there's any kind of corruptions or your system down or crash, you can always come back and restore your database and get your ZENworks up and running.
At some point,
so yeah, and then obviously you have to have a maintenance plan. Even if you don't have a DBA, these things are straightforward, that you can just go and visit a vendor website and then have a documented procedures that we have even given in our best practices, and then you can just set up a maintenance plan, which database does. If you're on MS SQL, that takes care of doing those things as a job, so you don't have to do it every week or daily basis, or you can come up with your own scripts to do that. So those are things which will keep your database system healthy, and because that's where all the data goes in from ZENworks side. So, and we do more of write, it's more of a write intensive. So you have to keep doing the maintenance. That way your zone performance is optimal. Yeah, so that's one part of the health check.
So I'm going to ask you the Vertica database, a little bit more details on Vertica, and do I need it, is what I'm going to ask for the audience here.
Yeah, so for most people, it's not always that you have to use Vertica, because if you're a bigger environment, or if your zone is over like 5,000, 10,000 devices, it provides certain set of features that is not available without Vertica. Plus, it does a lot of business analytics based reporting, which you might need. And also it builds a platform where we deliver more features, release over releases, and you can also create trending and many other dashboards, which is not available if you're not using Vertica. Also with ZRS, that Vertica is also exposed through a new domain. So in case you were setting up Vertica, you can even do that reporting through ZRS as well. So that way, Vertica is all over. It just have to be configured and set up depending on the system requirements and what you are going to achieve from Vertica here.
What you expect.
So you have to, what you expect from here.
Good.
So yeah, so this is something that you need to evaluate and see whether it fits in your current infrastructure, and whether you want to go ahead with Vertica and then have an appliance, because we give it as only as part of appliance. So you have to deploy a new appliance. Uh, um, I would recommend to have a separate appliance dedicated for Vertica and not use your current ZCM appliance. Let's say you have only one server in your zone. You don't want to just dedicate that to Vertica. Instead, you could just set up another appliance and then
Right.
just dedicate that to Vertica. So your main zone server is still doing the regular task and have an add-on on top of
Sure.
it as Vertica.
Perfect. And then, of course, those TIDs down there for some DB tips for troubleshooting and those types of things would be helpful. And the best practices documentation is there as well. So, yeah, thank you for that explanation on Vertica. On the larger, it'll help for the larger environments. So we review the zone health check. You need to check for subscriptions when you download that particular spreadsheet. You'll see that it has details on checking different subscriptions and different maintenance tasks. But you want to configure the maintenance tasks for non-peak hours so they're not obviously overloading or doing more tasks on top of each other, especially during the day when you have people logging in and getting bundles and policies and enforcing things. Minimize content replication overhead to remote satellites by replicating selective content bundles in randomized intervals. So, and if you do this selectively, again, document that so you have that known replication is modified from the general system replication. Configure balanced and randomized schedules for content replication or bundle deployment, collection rollup. Again, there's so many schedules and tasks that are going on behind the scenes as well as that you can configure. You want to keep these in mind. Keep the ZENworks server agents up to date to avoid any performance issue and ensure stability. So yes, you can run older agents on ZENworks 2020, but is it advisable? Well, one, they're not taking advantage of those features that have been put into the latest agent. And two, there could be some instability, some defects across those older agents that have been fixed in the latest. So take advantage of that. I know sometimes it's hard. I remember we would get our zone updated for the primaries and satellites, and then we'd have to schedule per department and roll them out. And that would take a little bit of time. And I know some of these organizations are huge, and doing that might be take a little bit of time. But do it in a rolled out fashion. Be able to have that rollout schedule, but get everybody up to the same as quick as possible is always good. You don't have to rush it, but keep that in mind that that's something that needs to be done. It looks like it rolled over a few times. So, zone underperformance, inadequate system resources. You can check memory, disk, CPU, number of primaries or satellite. Maybe you need to add another satellite. Maybe you need to add another primary and spread the load. ZENworks taking longer to process requests, database, or LDAP server response. You can look into that as far as connections to your database or your LDAP user source connections. Network environment restrictions, router, DNS, proxy, bandwidth. So you need to keep those, know what your restrictions are so you're not throwing a huge load over the network to a device loading Office, right? And let's say you're loading Office 2016 or 2019 on devices. Maybe you just need to trickle it down or stage it on a satellite in that area because your bandwidth won't handle it. Missing ZENworks configuration or basic recommendations as per best practices. So review the best practices occasionally. It's always good. I know we're all under the gun for time, but review. It would be worth going through the best practices guide and seeing what can be done. There's details in there that I've always picked up on that are helpful. There's awareness on ZENworks environment changes. So be aware of what your baseline is and how, if it's degrading or if it's getting better. Run reports. Identify large database tables and then have some purging action. Again, we're not all DBAs, but you'll find some basic maintenance tips on database maintenance in our documentation. Dashboard to identify lost or non-active devices. Where'd they go? So some remove them from ZCC, others will just archive them and retire them. I always wanted to know why it went in that closet and then came back 5 months later, right? Right around inventory time. Seen that happen. So being able to look at your dashboard, identify lost or non-active devices so you can track your assets. Run report on devices, health indicators, checking disk space. Again, you can advise others that they're running low on disk space. Automated checks using scripts. So there's Bash, PowerShell, cron jobs, Perl. Be aware that you can adjust some of your schedules with those third-party tools. And then checking ZENworks services. Notify the offline server status, diagnostics. You can check your system status by doing the Novell ZENworks configure -C system status. I have a couple more. Check collection queue. So inventory gets run on a machine. It rolls up to the next it's satellite, let's say, or directly to the primary. And then it gets housed in the collection queue to be processed. If that builds up, there may be one that's corrupt. That's holding up the whole process. So double check that. Again, you can always rerun an inventory on a device and see it go through the different channels, and you'll see the file. The GUID it is in the name of the file, and you can watch it propagate through each one of the states. So it's really helpful to be able to see which device might be holding it up. Primary or satellites and location closest servers should be grouped to randomize agent requests. So when you're configuring your location's closest server rules, you want to make sure that they're grouped properly and balanced. And if you have a checkbox in the, let's say, configuration for exclude everything but this server, let's say that you're now moving that server up to, or you're decommissioning that server. You need to also make sure that you've adjusted those rule sets so the devices don't go without a server once you decommission it. So again, documentation back on the system. I think the patch downloads, Arvind mentioned a little bit about that on remote servers, being able to judge those and be able to have those properly set. Apply security patches regularly and monitor database to check for any high utilization and underlying queries. Do you have anything else, Arvind, that you can think of? We covered quite a few things there.
No, I think we're good on you.
Good, thanks. So DMZ, we have a document out there for DMZ. Be aware of the ports that you allow and disallow or restrict. And then there's links here that has both the ZENworks TCP UDP ports that ZENworks uses and the DMZ server documentation and the best practices. You'll find that there. So look at those, be able to understand what you're doing. If you're doing DMZ stuff for your mobiles, if you're doing DMZ stuff for even your desktops or working at home people, if you're not using VPN. Go ahead.
Yeah, and some of these here are where you can choose to choose to whether you want to allow or restrict depending on how you want your zone admins to manage these things. Sometimes you want the contents to go through DMZ to your devices, but then you have also restrictions where you don't want the big contents to flow down to your devices. So you can pick and choose when you set up certain restrictions. You should know exactly what you're trying to achieve there, whether you want to just block the content, anything out of the DMZ, or let's say you want to stop any devices to register to DMZ, so they can only register once they are VPN into the environment. So that way you can define the restrictions on the DMZ server, but at the same time you're not kind of completely denying any services out of DMZ to your devices.
Yeah, what's the impact, right? Depending if you set this particular port. and is it doing the function you want it to do? So good call out on that. A little bit more endpoint web services support, some more allow restrict. And again, this is for external addresses, and access can be granted internally. So there are some ports here that you can look at to see if you need to open up any of these for your DMZ. And then double check the TCP and UDP ports if you need to add or exclude others. Now I know we want to get through this stuff, and there's a lot of stuff. I kind of wondered if this was the right thing to do to say size, design, and maintenance, because it's just such a huge topic. But also, if you have any questions, put it in chat. I'd like to see what you might have a question on. But we're going to keep plowing through this so that we can get you the information you need. Again, you can watch this recording afterwards to pick up more details. And if you're looking for the slide deck, feel free to email me, paul.pedron@microfocus.com. I'll send you the slide deck as well. So we're going to get into system update or upgrade, because now that we've done a little bit of the design, we know the architecture, we've installed, we've evolved a little bit. Now we're going to evolve some more into system updates or upgrades and talk about those a little bit. The pre-upgrade, always check system requirements and prerequisites. Okay, for instance, for an appliance server to migrate, you need to run a prereq RPM. So that way it's preparing the VA storage volume for the upgrade to the next version. Backups, be sure to do backups, right? And we can't say it enough, but it still occurs where we have customers that failed to have one, failed to have a snapshot. So we're getting them up and running a little bit more manually, and we're pretty much successful that way. But it'll just make things a lot easier if we have a base to start from if you have a backup. Deployment in lab or test before production. The best, and I'm going to inject here, be on a beta if you can, because you get to play with this. Of course, you have your own test environment in the beta, so you will have a test environment, but you get to see what's happening to this, the new upgrades. You have direct contact with engineers like us and developments people. So be sure to have a lab or test environment before production. You could see what actually happens in the process. Check the system update replication status. We've talked about this a couple times. You want it to be 100% across the board. No other application patches should be installing to prevent interference. This is for a zone upgrade. And then ZENworks update or service active on the primary or Windows devices. And you can do that with a ZACZeus ref. That's the ZENworks update system refresh guide or refresh command. Post upgrade, verify ZENworks version is current. Oh, ZDC. We're going to come up to ZDC, but pre-upgrade you also want to run ZDC. The nice thing about ZDC, and we have a separate slide for this, is it's non-evasive. So you can run this at any time. And if you're concerned about any of the details in there where it's giving you some errors, we'd be happy to help you make sure that it's a false positive or correct them for you or with you. So post upgrade, it also says run ZDC, which is important. Okay, that way you have a baseline. You can see the file and database system integrity. And the status of all ZENworks services enabled and running properly in diagnostics. So go into that ZCC diagnostic screen. Any comments in here? This is kind of just pre and post, Arvind?
That's pretty much. If you encounter any problems with ZDC report that might need someone to review, you can always send the report to us, and then we can probably guide you with the script to resolve it. Or sometimes it could be just false alarms. So you could just look up in the doc or our knowledge base for dates covering that. If not, then you can always report back to us, and then we can see if that needs to be fixed for ZDC part. But apart from that, if you're using a ZENworks reporting, I would also recommend to reconfigure your domain once you go to any ZENworks version, or let's say service desk.
Right. After the upgrade, if you've modified the, you obviously have modified the zone. If you have ZRS or ZSD, you want to reconnect back to ZCC or ZCM and reconfigure that that system for the latest upgrade that you just did on ZCM. So good point. Yeah, I didn't catch that. And the ZDC, there's, for instance, report back to us. We have released just the latest 2020 update 1 ZDC because there was some issues and reported by you, and so we were able to fix those and put a new ZDC out there. So, and there's a TID out there. We'll come across it in the slides, but be aware that we look forward to what your input is, all your input you have for us. Reviewing upgrade changes, locating the first primary server. So ZCC administrator, you need passwords like ZCC administrator, checking the ZCC diagnostics, the database role, who has a database role, or the external database user and password. Having these things for the upgrade is helpful. And then knowing about your certificates and the expiration date on your certificate. We see here, this one happens to be an embedded database, and it shows that, so I picked the right, I may have 3 appliances, and this is the right appliance because it shows the embedded data store. And then there's a script you can run for checking it out in your database. This one has a cert authority and the master primary. These are all the roles. The host name, there's 2 different primaries in this particular zone, so we're going to pick, it has an external database because we don't see a database listed here. So we're going to go ahead and pick the one master primary cert auth role and start with that one. Disk usage and cleanup candidates. So having the extra 20 gig for the ZENworks server before you start, we just want to make sure, because you download, you extract, then you install. So there may be 3 it cleans up, but there may be 3 occurrences of that update coming down depending on how you're working that. So plan for adequate disk space for your ZENworks deployments and server replacements. The keys, as Arvin mentioned earlier, the key space contributors, patch management is number 1. Okay, Linux subscription packages, system updates is another one, and then install and downloads. Excessive logging we've seen also. If you tweaked your logging to do larger archived logs and you're doing 10 now you've decreased the space on that device because logging's taking it up. Monitor disk usage for ZENworks volumes under diagnostics, and if there's critical alerts. So those alerts are there for you guys to look at under diagnostics. You can see if it's met that threshold of warning or critical, and avoid keeping stale work file or backups on volumes. Collection subfolders, excessive unprocessed files. Another thing is bundle versions. If you have bundle versions out there that have content, it will remain there until you remove it. Now, if there's a bundle that has a content of a particular exe that's 500 meg, and then you do a second version and import a 500 meg that's the same exact file because you're doing adjustments or whatever, it will then look at both of those, do some cleanup, and use the same one for both of those versions. But be aware that if those were separate versions, separate exes, it would remain, that content would remain out there until you remove those versions. And then some cleanup candidates and configurations for disk usage. Deleting older system updates. Be careful on this, because if you have, I always left at least one version back. If you have older agents and you haven't enabled, let's say there's a spoke disabled, meaning FDE, and you decide to start venturing into FDE, if you don't have those system update files available to that agent, it won't be able to turn on that spoke. So be careful with deleting some of the older ones. I typically left one stage behind. Configure logging to limits and clear older logs. And memory dumps the hprof files, if any. Remove older unused images or bundles, and that would be also versions. Configure patch management to download for selective vendors, platforms, and applicable patches. And then safe deletions of superseded files from older updates. And there's a TID there. And that refers to if you have the older agents and turning on spokes. Check out that TID. It'll talk a little bit more about that. You don't want to delete some of those superseded files. Arvin, any other cleanup mentions?
So again, since we know that most of the time patch kind of sits in a disabled state where the vendor will supersede the patches. So I have often seen that they take about 60 to 70% of your disk space if you're using them. So one of the things that we have done in 2020 is we have given an option in ZCC where you can set up the cleanup of the older version of bundle at the zone level or a folder level. That way, if you want to clean up, let's say all older version except the last 2 or 3, that way you can set up that configuration, and this would allow a job to run in the backend and remove all the older versions. So what that does is, if let's say there was a patch which had these contents in an older version, so once the older versions are deleted, those contents become orphan, or it could be a normal bundle as well, where you have been building over the time, and that way it will clean up the older version, and then once the orphan cleanup kicks in, it will remove those contents. So that way you can see a difference with the content cleanup after the bundle version is deleted. When the patches gets disabled and it was already cached, it doesn't get deleted as long as you are using them within your policies. So you have to make sure when you delete the older version of policies, those patches become orphan and they get also added in the cleanup process. So that way you can end up getting more disk space freed just by enabling those settings which have been provided. But apart from that, those here it covers most of the cleanup candidates which you can do manually with some kind of calculation, because you need to know where the most disk space is being consumed before trying to delete. Like deleting a 5 meg bundle is not going to make difference. So you have to figure out what are your biggest bundles which are not being used. Probably they have been just created and not assigned. So just identify those and then just make a decision to delete them, or whether it could be images or whatever is mentioned here. So that way you can get some free space.
Yeah, that's new in 2020. That's a great asset. Tips for a successful issue analysis. So ZENworks logging, logs, and more logs, right? ZENworks logs can surface issues that may be causing some optimal performance. So it may not seem like really an error, but if you review the logs, you can see that there's retries or things. Maybe it's going from the satellite and couldn't find it, so it's going to the primary server upstream in order to get some content. But you're able to see that in the log. So review the logs occasionally, and you might be able to see. I know there's a lot of stuff in the log, and if you're also consider reviewing them, periodically, and then review troubleshooting videos for more information about logs, locations, and understandings of logs. So we have a TID that's coming, or a slide coming up that has the different areas to look for logs, and also on appliances, and so that you can actually navigate to those areas to find the logs. Configure the local device logging on the primary to debug in advance. So ZENinfo captures the logs for required support assistance, but you have agent debug logging. We will get the most out of the log when we have it in debug mode. However, you may not want to leave it in debug mode because of the logging, of the size of the logs and so forth. So it all depends on your environment. Again, you know your environment best, but be aware that you sending in, as you have probably experienced, will ask for ZENinfo in debug and then experiencing the issue you're having. But if you're trying to debug other areas like remote management or certificates, look at TID 3418069. It's been a generational help to many versions. This TID's been around forever, so it's a great asset for you. Tips and tricks, troubleshooting content, integrity of content repo versus database status. So here's just some tips for running some commands or being able to get an inside view of different services or what's going on with your system. So by running the check content system, you can see which ones are orphaned that Arvind talked about. Doing the dstart configure action helps with automating the ZCM services restart on Linux. Reviewing system bundles. If you go to the bundle folder and put the ampersand UID equals /system, you could see what the bundle, some back end bundles that are being processed, PRUs and TFTP. Again, we ask that you don't make any changes unless you're under support supervision on that. So there's a disclaimer on this one, but it's very handy to see that particular all the back end under the hood bundles. Monitoring ZENworks loader top queue, you can do that by a zman command. Unprocessed collection files, again looking collection. We talked a little bit about this with inventory. And then server log analysis using the parser tool that Craig Wilson put out, smparse, CTID 7004531. So with that, any mentions on ZENworks logging or tips and tricks, Arvind?
I think these are more tied to a specific area that you're kind of troubleshooting in, and they may not qualify for your usual troubleshooting on certain problems. So these are just tips, but in general, when you're kind of running into any problems, the best thing is enable debug logging. And as part of ZENinfo, we try to gather I would say 95% of the logs, but sometime we might need additional logs working with you because we might see the problem not fully captured in the existing logs. But it's a good start to reproduce the problem, set it to debug other way, and then reproduce the problem, and then grab the ZENinfo logs. Yeah. You can upload them, and that way we can get the first-hand analysis done on the problem with your descriptions also added to that.
And that's on the agent side, and on the server side would be the services messages and the loader messages. Obviously, is a good start.
Yeah, and the same ZENinfo would grab that. So
true.
Yeah.
So if you run,
you don't have to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what Arvind's referring to is if you run ZENinfo on a primary server, it grabs everything in the logs file, which is also the zman log, the ZCC log, the service messages. Now it's going to be quite big, so you need to upload it to the FTP site, but it's a good way to get all the logs off the primary server, including the server logs. So good point.
Yeah, the only case I have seen where it may not capture is, let's say your logging level is set to debug, but the size of the logs or the number of backup logs is not sufficient that goes all the way back when the problem happened, because sometimes when you set it to debug, it rolls over faster. That way you need to increase your logging backups and your size of the logs, so it kind of spans over the entire period where the problem happened. So that way we can just grab everything and analyze the log.
And I know I've been at fault at this as well, is if you encounter something that looks suspicious, you don't even know if it's an error or not, double check the troubleshooting section of the update, right? Because there's always a troubleshooting and known issues. So you may be experiencing a known issue where we have an FTF or we have a workaround that takes care of that particular issue until the next version. So I know I've been at fault at that, double checking both unknown and troubleshooting sections in the documentation.
Yeah. So known issues is what covers in the README. the knowledge base states, which also covers any of the known issues that we encounter. FAQ and section wise, like in the doc, each section has its own set of issues for troubleshooting, so you can even look into that. So
Sure.
that way you cover that. Sometimes we try to document them so you don't have to contact, and there is a workaround direct in the doc, so you can just, or you can just say this doesn't impact anything, and you can just skip over.
I do have
Yeah.
a question. It looks like it's from Valerie. Thank you, Valerie. If you have created your own deployment agent, you need to back up before you move to the new appliance. So she creates her own deployment agent. She customizes it. Make sure you back that up. So that's a good call out. Being able to, so when you do your new appliance, you have, or I'm sorry, when you do your, when you move to a new appliance for your upgrade, because appliances are a new appliance, you're able to get that. So thanks for that call out, Valerie. I appreciate that. And somebody said, hello, everyone. I can't read the small writing, but I appreciate you out there. Keep them coming. And Arvin, I'm going to let you do the next 2 slides.
Okay, so.
Yep. So this is the recording the zone health checklist. This happened to be one that we sent out to a customer.
So this one is for the pre-upgrade checks that you're looking at?
This is a health check. I'm sorry, I got some background noise I'm trying to keep from going on stream. So this is a health check that we did. And being able to check a few things, system requirements, tuning, threads, certificates, all that stuff, as a small checkoff list. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an overall summary. I think that pretty much highlights whatever we have covered in the previous slides. So this is like just a gist of everything. There you can see what are your checklist options here, where ZDC, your system requirements, certificates, CA, dedicated servers, what are the schedules configured, your baseline. So these are some of the things that they're pretty self-evident, but if most of the time, if you need to, I think they're covered in the previous slides. It just it's a highlight of the things that we have covered, so we don't have to dig into any of them. But I think I don't see anything that is specifically needs to be explained here. Do you have anything that you want me to?
No, it's just basically having something like this really helps with your environment of not so you don't forget something, right? Having that checkoff list.
This is just one-page view of everything that we have done before. So.
Okay, let me move on. Oh, sorry. And then here's your debug settings. Being able to run, you have that. Oh, go ahead, Arvin. I'll let you go ahead and explain this slide. They're almost done.
Yeah, so we already covered the TADE, and then if you're into where you're doing the update or a migration, then you can look into the system update log. If you see that there's a problem where a device or the server fails to update, the best point to start is system update.log, and then let's say a particular MSI or RPM failed, then straight away we can know that this was a problem. You can send this log, or you can just directly send the ZENinfo. Sometimes I've seen random problems where you can just redeploy and that fixes it. Sometimes it could be permission issues, or it could be a particular dependency, or so it totally depends on what kind of errors you get. But this is a good starting point to check with system update log. But yeah, I mean, there are standard locations where you can look for logs. ZENinfo just scans through everything, put them into a zip. So still, if you don't want to analyze too much, then just get the ZENinfo, and that covers everything. Ensure it's debugged.
It'll pick it up.
Apart from, it'll pick it up. So only this is mentioned just in case you want to look in the real problem, then you can just go to the right log. But this is just an example. It may not cover everything with system update, right? This is just one particular file that's a starting point. Again, from appliance perspective, it totally depends on what area you are troubleshooting, because sometimes there may be a problem with migration, or there may be a problem with certain service not starting up on appliance. So, or maybe a certain system level things are not working. So for the system level or related stuff, it's good to look into Verilog messages. If anything got to do with applying your OS updates or security updates, I would say checking the zipper log would help. Anything with the web app console, it would be good to look into Jetty logs, because that's a web server that captures anything in your appliance console. Even data model logs captures if you're kind of doing some changes in your appliance console that leads to some error or a or unexpected behavior. So those last two logs captures those information. So
Yes,
that's pretty much
perfect.
an appliance.
Yep. And now we have the screen, the 7444, for viewing the update. But I've also viewed the update by tail effing the system update log with percent, and you could just see the percent as it builds up. So, but we also have the 7444 as well.
Yeah. So that's probably preferred way of looking at it,
It is.
instead of going over to the log, because most people are used to the UI view of it, and that gives you even the details. If there are certain errors, you can rerun the update. If let's say a database upgrade failed, then you can rerun. There's an option to rerun, and you can see the overall summary of which servers got updated and which servers are running at a certain point. Like there are 5 servers where update is assigned, then you can monitor the progress of each of them.
All
And
of them. Yep.
same,
And
yeah.
the satellites, yeah. Perfect. Okay, so pre-upgrade checks. We have the ZDC schema verification. You guys have probably run ZDC. You know what's in the reports. Review those again. If you have any issues that you want to be that you feel concerned about, let us know. Also, on the 2020 upgrade, it runs a ZDC on the ZENworks and audit database, and it during the wizard you'll actually see this screen, and you can review those reports before moving forward. So it's just on the database because it does do some checks there. All right. And that's this here. So being able to, you can download the ZENworks diagnostics down from your customer portal. And it's basically ZENworks database and audit database being able to run on there. There's some commands there, but the actual utility, if you just run the help on the utility or ZDC, it'll give you also some help. And the ZENworks services check. Oh, it does do a ZENworks services check during the upgrade on the first primary. So the first primary, you'll go out to the other primaries and say, are your services running? If it does, it'll let you know, hey, we need to stop those before we continue on for this upgrade. Memory calibration tool. I'm going to let Arvin take this one on. I haven't done this too much. I have done it a couple times, but Arvin, what can you tell us about this?
So this thing is new to 2020 because of the memory system requirement has changed over because of the new components and let's say Vertica, Postgres. So many things can be hosted on a server or externally. So depending on how you configured your environment, we are kind of calibrating the memory because of to assess and make sure you are running right configuration on the right servers with a certain roles enabled. So for that purpose, we have a new tool which helps to calibrate memory per process, and then gives you a kind of a summary of what percentage of memory is kind of configured out of total in terms of the actual numbers. So you can just readjust it, or you can just fine tune depending on if you need to scale up or scale down. Let's say, for example, you're running Vertica on a machine, then without Vertica, you may be just good with 12 gig, but since our recommended for Vertica is 16, you want you to have that minimum 16 gig requirement. Otherwise, the Vertica configuration might fail. So that way, it's a good way to do a pre-check in terms of pre-check on the server for all the memory requirements of the processes running within ZENworks. So when you run this tool, it's more of a configure action. So when you run this tool, as you see in the screenshot, it's going to give you the server, loader, Vertica, Kafka. So those are some of the things which are added newly, except server and loader. Apart from that, there may be an agent and all, which are just minimal overhead. So we don't account for those services. But server and loader are the key. And then let's say you're running database on the same server, you might have to account for database memory as well. So for that purpose, you need to just calibrate, which would give you a recommended value, and then you can set those values based on the documentation. So you need to just accordingly. So that way you can just tune your memory for your processes, so that ZENworks is not it's not kind of running into
not starved.
Starved for memory.
So, and this is another. Go ahead.
So now, I was mentioning that you probably have to. I think you need to restart services when you do this change, and this is something which is not only for Appliance, which is having Vertica. You can do that for any other servers, even it could be a non-Appliance or just regular servers. You can do that.
This is a new command for the Zone 2020. And this is part of the process of we're evolving ZENworks into more feature sets and more functions. So document this, understand what it does, and know that you have these tools available to be able to accordingly readjust as you evolve your zone. Some of the best practices on server upgrade and migration: obviously documentation and Readme for system requirements and prerequisites and licenses. OS versions are important, obviously, and database versions. Again, those system requirements are so critical. Backup certificates and server config, deploy in lab if you can. Try to get up a lab of some sort so that you can at least see what happens when you do this server upgrade or migration. And then no other applications or patches should be installing to prevent conflicts. Maybe even AV turned off. Those types of things might conflict with it. And then ZENworks Updater service must be running so that it can utilize that service to do the update. Now on the agents, you must have all the primaries and satellites done before updating any agents. Older agents are backwards compatible, but they're not using the features if you're not on the current agent, right? So you want to be, and it doesn't have the latest fixes as well, should there be some defects. So try and get them up to the latest. Verify replication status. We've talked about that over and over. We've just seen calls come in where this was the issue and we just had to wait a little bit longer for it to replicate, so that, or they had a replication issue, or they just had to wait before updating the agents. Ensure system requirements are met for the managed devices like .NET versions, device communicating to the zone, so forth. And then managed devices or satellites on 11.3x or later can be directly updated to 2020. And then check for any supported ZENworks agents or unsupported OS versions. They did post in the 2020 documentation no longer supported ZENworks or managed devices. So they actually, the ones that dropped off, because like Windows 7 or whatever it was, there was some that dropped off, and they actually posted that in the documentation. So that's in the README as well. You can run 11.3x, but preferred to bring them up to speed. Post-upgrade checks. Validate ZCC and ZENworks services running on upgraded primary. We want to make sure those show successful before moving to the next primary. All right, because it still has to run. It still has to run the packages. So once ZCC, even though the 7444, the system update that shows 7444 on the device being updated, it'll say upgraded successful. But you typically have to reboot, and then it runs your package rebuilds. And then when ZCC says successful, you move on to the next primary server or the satellites. And then once those are all, you can do your managed devices. Run ZDC for version 2020. This is post-upgrade. Configure the system updates entitlements in ZCC. ZENworks Appliance Console, register and configure for the online updates. And then ZENworks Imaging, apply the Texera NTFS driver. There's a new one that was released, I think, in June. And then recommendations, keep necessary backups, and then reconfigure if you have ZRS or ZSD so that you're tapping into the latest version, as we mentioned early on in the broadcast. Any other post-upgrade checks that you know of, Arvind, that you can think of?
I think they're all well covered here.
Yep.
So that's pretty much it.
Good.
Yeah.
Now we're coming down to the training resources, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, or top of the last hour. On-demand training is out there. There's also some free training in the on-demand, even if you haven't purchased it. I do recommend purchasing the Patch Management 2020 just came out. So there's an actual training, and we are accredited with Acclaim badges. So you get your official certification through doing those courses as well. Education Central will give you a broader aspect of the ZENworks. There's knowledge-based forums. You guys, amongst yourselves, you guys do a great job. We try to tap into those and give help out there, as well as other partners and consultants. So we appreciate everybody's help on those things. Support and training on the YouTube channel. ZENworks webinar recordings. There's a whole index. Even though you may be on 2020, there may be a 2017 video or webinar out there that still that features very usable in 2020 and tells you how to set that up or talks about how to configure it. And then the ZENworks documentation. And that's it for. Do we have any other mentions? Thank you, Valerie, and others that have chimed in on chat. I hope everybody's okay out there. You're on the UK. I appreciate you joining this late in the afternoon for you. And is there any other shout outs out there? Any questions we have for us while you got us on the horn regarding sizing, design, maintenance, those types of aspects? I'm not seeing any yet. We'll wait. There is a little bit of a delay on this stream, so we'll wait a little bit for them to hear. And we do appreciate you guys being here. I'm going to move forward to the next time in lab. We're going to have ZENworks Service Desk Asset Management with Bob Reynolds. He's going to be on with us. He's going to show us a demo. Sorry we didn't have too much time for demo. We have about 10 minutes if we need to get into a zone. We can do so and show you some configurations, but only if your questions warrant that. If you're sending in a question, we'd be happy to do that. Do we have... Arvin, I want to thank you for coming aboard today, taking some time out of your day and being with us. You're a great colleague. I appreciate all your help, and I know a lot of people have gained a lot of help from you over the years. Anything you have to mention to them for updates or their zone configurations?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think we try to cover overall zone performance and key areas, but I mean, it's an individual. Individually, you have to manage your zone on a day-to-day basis and make sure that the environments are up to date, because that way our work is reduced when there are fixes and patches which are already applied, because you are updating on a latest version. So that way we can reduce the number of potential problems or the
Sure.
issues that we face day to day. So that way we can, and if you have any questions on the update process or any other particular functionality, then you can always contact us. But apart from the regular training videos and learning process. So yeah, so that pretty much, I think you did a great job, Paul. I think we did cover everything.
I think
If
so.
there's any question, yeah, if you have any questions, we can just definitely take one-on-one.
For sure, yeah, we could take a one-on-one. You can email me at paul.pedron@microfocus.com. Happy to get you the answer, even if I don't know it. And most of all, we're trying to get more and more information out for you guys. We will have this presentation. Email me, and I can send you the presentation. Thank you for that question in chat. We'll be happy to send that to you. Email me, paul.pedron@microfocus.com, and I'll send it to you. It will also be a recording on this channel. So you'll see this very recording on this channel, and you can forward to where you're looking at these particular slides if you need to review. So be aware that that recording will be available here probably within the next couple hours on this channel as I get the recording published. Otherwise, I don't see any other mentions in chat, so I appreciate everybody being here again today. I really hope you're being safe. Stay safe, be kind, be aware of others around you, and we'll all get through this together. We appreciate your time here today. Have a great afternoon, and I hope to see you in a couple weeks with Bob Reynolds. Thank you much.